So imagine watching your entire society starve. And, like, not because the farms stopped producing food or the rivers dried up.
Right, not an actual famine.
Exactly. But imagine they starve because the banks ran out of a mathematical concept. I mean, it sounds like a lazy sci-fi plot, right?
It really does. But that is exactly how our minds are wired to operate.
Yeah. Usually when we talk about thinking, there's this underlying assumption that our thoughts are like the ultimate tool for uncovering the truth.
Right, like a flashlight in a dark room.
Yeah. You want to understand something, you just point your brain at it, you concentrate, and boom, the truth is illuminated.
And, it's deeply comforting to believe our intellect is this flawless mapping software for the universe. But the source material we are looking at today, which is drawn from the philosopher Alan Watts, it introduces this massive disruptor.
Which is just fascinating.
It is, because he asks, what if thought is actually a mechanism we use to conceal the truth? Right. What if the ability to use symbols and abstract thoughts, which, is undeniably a useful survival trait.
Sure, absolutely.
What if that is also the very thing blinding us to physical reality?
So our mission for this deep dive into the source material is to explore exactly that. How we, as humans, get constantly bamboozled by our own extractions.
You really do.
We're exploring this fatal habit of confusing the map for the territory. And recognizing this trap, honestly, it can fundamentally alter how you listening to this, how you interact with the world, make decisions, and even understand your own existence.
It's a huge paradigm shift for the learner, for sure. And to see how deeply we confuse symbols with reality, we kind of have to look at the most universal abstraction we interact with every single day.
Money.
Exactly, money. Money is essentially a method of bookkeeping.
Right.
It exists on the exact same plane of reality as grams or meters or lines of latitude.
I mean, you can't trip over a line of latitude.
No, and you can't eat a dollar bill either. It was invented as this ingenious device to bypass the really cumbersome procedures of barter.
Creating chickens for shoes, that kind of thing.
Right, exactly. But over time, our civilization developed this intense neurosis. We became utterly convinced that money has an independent physical reality of its own.
See, I hear that, but I got to push back a little because money feels intensely real when I'm, trying to buy groceries.
Sure, of course it does.
It feels like the electricity powering my life. If I don't have it, my lights literally go out. To use a modern analogy, treating money like a pure abstraction feels like looking at your phone's battery indicator and telling yourself the percentage icon isn't real.
Okay, but that analogy actually proves the point perfectly.
Wait, really? How?
Because the percentage icon isn't the electricity, it's just a symbol representing the chemical state of the battery.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Right, if you stared at the icon and completely ignored a physically bloated sparking battery right in your hand, you would be confusing the map for the territory.
That makes total sense.
Look at the Great Depression. One day, business was booming. The next day, there were massive bread lines.
Yeah.
Did the physical resources disappear overnight? Did the soil stop growing wheat or the cows stop producing milk?
Not at all.
Right. The only thing that vanished was an abstract concept.
People starved because they collectively agreed there was a lack of money.
Exactly, completely ignoring the huge abundance of actual physical wealth surrounding them.
Watts has this incredible analogy in the sources that highlights the absolute absurdity of this.
Oh, the construction worker one. I love this.
Yes. So he describes a construction worker showing up to a job site. And he has this massive pile of wood, stacks of metal, all his tools, and his tape measure.
He's ready to go.
Totally ready. And the boss walks up and says, "Sorry, we can't build today." The worker points to the physical materials and is like, "Oh, why?" And the boss replies, "We've run out of inches. We used up all our inches yesterday."
Which is hilarious. We laugh at that, but locking our global prosperity to something like the gold standard operated on the exact same flawed logic.
Right, because we're tying it to a shiny rock.
Exactly. When you lock gold in a vault in the form of ingots, just to back up a paper currency, you take a highly useful physical metal, something fantastic for, dentistry or jewelry or electronics, and you make it completely useless.
He literally just sits in the dark.
It sits in the dark. It becomes a false security. It's an idol that diverts human attention away from solving practical, physical problems, like discovering new ways to harvest water or generate clean energy.
And that possessiveness over an abstraction, it naturally bleeds into how we treat our belief systems, right? Because if we're willing to let real humans starve because we ran out of quote-unquote inches, what happens when we apply this same psychological confusion to ideology?
Well, the tragedy of mistaking the map for the territory scales up violently.
Yeah.
Our political and social conflicts are increasingly fought over these vast, sweeping abstractions. We wage wars over giant systems of thought concepts like communism or capitalism.
And while we obsess over defending those abstract ideas, we pay less and less attention to the actual physical environment sustaining us. The earth, the trees, the water, the wildlife.
Exactly. And the source material brings up a highly specific historical example regarding the U.S. Congress to illustrate this disconnect.
And real quick before we get into that for you listening, we need to explicitly state that we are not taking a political side here.
Right. No, absolutely not.
We aren't taking a stance on flag burning or capitalism or communism. We are strictly, impartially reporting Watt's philosophical observation about human psychology.
Yes, this is just about how humans prioritize symbols over physical reality.
Exactly. So, setting the actual politics aside, the psychological observation is fascinating. Lawmakers passed legislation with stern penalties, complete with patriotic poetry, to penalize anyone who presumed to burn the American flag.
Right.
But those exact same lawmakers were simultaneously allowing the pollution of the nation's waters, the devastation of its forests, and the bulldozing of its mountains.
And the psychological mechanism at play there is profound. I mean, why is it so much easier for human beings to protect a symbol than the reality it represents?
Because reality is difficult.
Exactly, because physical reality is messy, it's complex, and it requires incredibly difficult compromises to maintain. A symbol, however, is perfect. It is eternal in our minds.
They were failing to notice the difference between the cloth flag and the physical country. We are literally burning up the physical country that the flag stands for, just to protect the piece of cloth.
That's the ultimate tragedy here. When we obsess over the abstract, we neglect the tangible world. We aggressively defend the paper map, while the actual forest we are standing in catches fire.
Wow. So if money and flags and grand ideologies are all just abstract maps, it forces us to ask what the actual territory is.
What's a real world? Yeah.
Right. If we strip away every single symbol, what is the physical world actually made of? What is the basic fundamental stuff?
Well, if you ask a quantum physicist, they will tell you something that completely upends human intuition. The idea of matter, the concept of some basic solid stuff out of which the universe is built, like clay in a pottery studio, that is itself just another philosophical concept.
Wait, really? Matter is a concept?
Yes. No scientist has ever been able to put their finger on fundamental stuff. When they look closely enough, they only find processes. They find mathematical patterns.
The sources mention physicists using statistical mechanics to deal with these infinitely complex processes.
Right.
And just to make that tangible for you listening, statistical mechanics is basically a way of predicting the behavior of a massive crowd by looking at averages, rather than try to track every single individual.
That's a great way to put it.
It's like predicting the flow of traffic on a highway without needing to know what every single driver had for breakfast or what song they're listening to.
Exactly. And that is exactly how we have to look at the universe. We measure the behavior of the crowd of energy, the overall pattern, because the individual stuff just refuses to sit still.
It's constantly moving.
Always. And this realization exposes a massive spiritual paradox in our culture. We have this habit of thinking that abstract permanent things, like the equation 1 + 2 = 3, are pure or spiritual.
Right, because they never change.
Exactly. And we think that tangible, physical things are unspiritual or dirty or just mundane. But Watts brings in a principle from Zen Buddhism to shatter this. He says a tomato is actually far more spiritual than a math equation.
I love that, because a math equation is rigid. It is permanently fixed in our minds. But a tomato is completely transient.
Right. It grows, it ripens, it rots.
The source uses the word diaphanous to describe this state, meaning something light, delicate, and completely ungraspable.
Yes. We associate permanence with the spiritual, but Watts argues that the more permanent a thing is, the more lifeless it is. Think of a diamond. Nothing in the world is as dead as a diamond.
Which is so fascinating because Buddhists frequently use the diamond, the vajra, as a spiritual symbol.
They do. But they do not use it because it is hard or permanent, which is the whole Western assumption.
Right.
They use it because it's transparent. It affords a symbol of the void. And the void does not mean some black, empty nothingness. It means you cannot get any concept or idea that will sufficiently define physical reality.
Because it keeps changing.
Exactly. Every rigid idea you try to map onto the physical world will eventually be wrong because the physical world is always moving.
Okay, I understand the physics argument that matter is just moving energy, but let me challenge this because it can feel a bit like an intellectual parlor trick.
Fair enough?
If I punch a brick wall, I break my hand.
You do.
That wall isn't a diaphanous, transient pattern to me. It is solid, unyielding reality. So how do we reconcile the lived experience of absolute solidity with this idea of a transient void? Like, what am I actually looking at when I look at another human being?
You are recognizing a remarkably consistent pattern.
A pattern.
Yeah. Imagine a long rope. The first
Uh-huh.
section is made of rough manila hemp, the next section is soft cotton, the next is nylon, and the final section is smooth silk.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Now, tie a knot in the manila section and slowly slide that physical knot all the way down the rope. As it moves from manila to cotton to nylon to silk, is it the same knot?
Well, the shape is the same, even though the material keeps swapping out.
Exactly. The material making up the knot changes completely, but you recognize the pattern. Or think of a whirlpool in a river, like the famous ones at Niagara Falls.
Oh, yeah.
The whirlpool's always there, it has a name, it has a location, but the actual water making it up is rushing through and disappearing every single second.
Wow.
We are exactly like that whirlpool. The
Mhm.
water, the carbons, the chemicals in our bodies are changing constantly. What people recognize as you is just a consistent pattern of energy resisting the flow around it.
So reality is this infinitely complex, flowing whirlpool of patterns.
Yes.
Which brings us to the core problem. If reality is that fluid, why do we constantly try to pause the whirlpool? Why do we try to pin it down with our conscious thought?
Because we fundamentally misunderstand the capacity of our own brains. We identify entirely with our conscious attention, and we wildly overestimate what it can handle.
We think we're smarter than we are.
We really do. The average human being, using only their conscious, deliberate thought, can only track about 3 variables at a time without needing to grab a pencil and paper.
It is like playing a massive, modern, open-world video game.
Yeah.
Your conscious mind is just the tiny, like the little mini-map in the corner of the screen tracking your immediate location and maybe your health bar.
That's a brilliant analogy, yes.
But your unconscious mind is the actual graphics engine, rendering millions of pixels, calculating physics, lighting, sound for an entire world in the background, all in real time.
That hits the nail on the head. The brain is the most complex known object in the universe. It processes millions of sensory data points, temperature shifts, micro-expressions on other people's faces, spatial awareness, without you ever needing to name them or articulate them.
It just happens.
Right. Our conscious attention is just a tiny, narrow radar ray scanning the environment for unusual features. The danger happens when we falsely identify our entire self with that tiny radar ray.
Because we identify as the radar, we try to aggressively control the entire room. We try to
Yeah.
pin down the physical world and possess it, which naturally guarantees massive frustration.
Oh, absolutely.
Like if you cling to the idea of your fluid, aging body as a permanent, solid thing, you're going back to war with the whirlpool.
And this possessiveness over the transient world is the root of profound spiritual confusion, particularly when we examine historical concepts like the synth of the flesh.
Right.
St. Paul frequently wrote about the flesh being opposed to the spirit. Now, if you read that literally, it feels incredibly anti-life, as if physical skin and meat are inherently evil.
Which is how a lot of people interpret it.
Exactly. But Watts clarifies that the flesh in this context is a spiritual category of hang-ups. It is the desire to freeze reality.
The 19th century mystic Ramakrishna frequently warned about the evils of woman and gold. And we've already established how treating gold as a permanent idol is an evil of possessiveness.
Right.
The exact same dynamic applies to human relationships. The evil isn't the woman. The evil is the attempt to possess another human being as if they were a static object.
Like their property.
Yeah, it's the impulse to say, I love you so much I want to own you and tie you down.
There is a satirical Ogdenash poem mentioned in the sources about a man who loved his wife so intensely that he climbed a mountain and named it Mount Mrs. Oswald just to stamp his permanent ownership on her.
Oh my gosh.
It highlights the total absurdity of treating people like real estate. You can have a wonderfully rich spiritual romantic life if you let go of possessiveness, if you let people flow and change.
And this completely reframes the Buddhist precepts around passion or kama and intoxicating substances.
It does.
The goal isn't a rigid purity test where you avoid alcohol or passion entirely. It is about not exploiting the physical world to soothe your mental anxieties.
Yes, exactly.
It's about not eating just because you're bored, or, as the Zen saying goes, raising waves when no wind is blowing.
The distinction lies between spontaneous action and agonizing thought. Exploiting the physical world to fill a spiritual vacuum is a trap created by the conscious mind.
There's a famous Zen story from the source material that illustrates this perfectly. I love this one.
Oh, the two monks. Yes, tell it.
So, two monks are traveling, and they come to a dangerously flooded river. A young woman is standing there, unable to cross. Now, monks are strictly forbidden from touching women.
All right, strict rules.
But one monk immediately picks her up, carries her across the rushing water, puts her down on the dry bank, and just keeps walking.
Doesn't even hesitate.
Nope. But hours later, the second monk is agonizing over this. He finally snaps and says, "Do you realize you broke a sacred monastic rule by picking up that woman?" And the first monk just looks at him and says, "I left her at the river, but you're still carrying her."
It perfectly captures the burden of the conscious mind. The physical action of carrying the woman was natural, it was spontaneous, and it was appropriate to the immediate physical reality.
Yeah, it happened, and then it floated away.
Exactly. The second monk, however, was completely trapped by the abstraction. He was carrying the rule, the symbol, the thought. The agonizing thought was the true burden, completely obscuring the reality of the present moment.
Wow. So if thought is a burden, and we can't pin down reality with rules or concepts, and we can't physically possess a transient world, then what is the actual truth? With a capital T.
Right, the big question. Well, this requires the ultimate paradigm shift. The truth is that truth cannot be stated. There is no absolute, objective, fixed way that the world is, waiting out in the void to be accurately described by a human brain.
I mean, that goes against every instinct we have.
Yeah.
We want objective facts. We want history to be a pure science. But even history is an art form attempting to put a chaotic, irrational narrative into a neat, understandable box.
It's just a map.
Yeah. When a genuinely good person gets cancer, we desperately seek a logical reason for it so we can feel secure. But sometimes the physical world just wiggles in ways that defy our maps.
We are so addicted to the idea of an external, objective world independent of us. But consider the stars in the Big Dipper.
Okay.
If you ask for their true position, the only scientifically honest answer is, it depends entirely on where you are looking at them from. Reality is not a fixed object. Reality is a relationship.
A relationship. The acoustic analogy from Watts drives this home brilliantly.
Like a drum.
Yes. If you take a drum that has no skin on it and you hit it as hard as you can with your bare fist, it makes no noise.
Right, just silent air.
Because noise isn't an independent object. Noise is the physical relationship between the fist and the skin. Sound literally does not exist until a pressure wave interacts with an eardrum. Before that, it is just silent air movement.
That's incredible to think about.
And in the exact same way, light doesn't exist out there in the void. Light is the relationship between electrical energy and your specific eyeballs.
Which means you literally evoke the world based on the kind of organism you are. A human evokes one reality. A bat using echolocation evokes a completely different reality.
And neither is more true than the other.
Exactly. Neither is more true. And this unpinnable, constantly shifting, infinitely complex relationship, which radically exceeds all our definitions and conscious thoughts, that is actually what philosophers and mystics mean when they talk about the concept of God.
So we aren't talking about a giant gaseous vertebrate sitting on a cloud managing the universe.
No. Not a cosmic boss in the sky, no. We are talking about an infinite, undefined reality that simply cannot be caught in the tiny net of our conscious thoughts.
Wow. For you listening, this fundamentally changes how you process information.
Sure.
Every article you read, every fact you memorize isn't an objective piece of the universe. It is a relationship between the data and your specific vantage point.
You aren't collecting truth. You are participating in it.
Man, we've covered massive ground today. We've explored how easy it is to confuse the tape measure for the physical building, to mistake the flag for the land, and to identify our entire self with the tiny mini-map of our conscious mind.
We've seen that reality is a fluid whirlpool, not a dead diamond.
Right.
And I think the actionable takeaway here is learning to let go of the map and actually trust yourself to experience the territory.
So the next time you feel completely paralyzed by information overload, or you find yourself agonizing over a spreadsheet trying to force a decision to fit a perfect, logical narrative, remember, You are trying to grasp water.
Yep.
You are carrying the girl across the river for hours and hours. Put her down. Trust your incredibly complex, brilliant, unconscious brain to do the heavy lifting it was designed to do without your conscious radar trying to micromanage every single variable.
Absolutely. And as you step back into that fluid reality, I will leave you with this final provocative thought to mull over.
Let's hear it.
If the world you experience, the sights, the sounds, the very fabric of your physical reality is purely a relationship between the universe and the specific you that is observing it, what happens to the entire universe when you simply change your mind?
Oh, wow. It really makes you wonder how much power you actually have over the reality you're standing in.
It really does.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and maybe put the tape measure down for a little while.